Good morning. Glad you are here with us. Go ahead and turn your Bibles to the book of Nahum, chapter 3. We're going to finish it today. We are done with Nahum today. Much as I love baseball, grew up playing baseball, it was just my favorite thing in the world to do. And watching it, still watch it some, coaching it as I've gotten older. But there's one thing I never liked about it, and that was striking out. I just couldn't stand that aspect of the game. Because to me, when I would strike out, I felt like I failed. And I never wanted to turn. You have to turn and walk back to the dugout to your team like you just failed them. And I hated that feeling. All of the baseball greats have struck out. Everybody that plays that game strikes out, but I just didn't like that aspect of the game. Nineveh strikes out. In fact, the book will end with Nineveh making 3 attempts at success again, and all 3 fail. So turn with me, Nahum chapter 3. We're going to start in the tail end of verse 15. We'll read verse 15 again. We ended with it last week. But it says, verse 15, there the fire will devour you, the sword will cut you down, and like grasshoppers consume you. We talked about that last week. This will be, Nineveh will be a total ruin. But where I want to focus is the very tail end. Multiply like grasshoppers, multiply like locusts. So first thing I want you to see this morning is that Nineveh trusted in numbers for security. Her security was found in the multitude. Her security was found in the masses. Nahum uses the locust metaphor to describe Nineveh's large and growing population. And see, this large population provided her a sense of security. There's power in numbers. You're zooming down the interstate, and there's someone having car trouble, and we're thinking, I don't think so. I don't think so. But if 2 or 3 cars are pulled over, and there are 2 or 3 people out there helping, it's proven you may not stop, but you will come a lot closer to stopping. Isn't that interesting? Why? Well, there's power in numbers. So much so that Nineveh believed they were invincible. Their security totally found in numbers. Just as nothing stood in the way of the locust swarm. Have you ever seen the locust swarm? You ever seen pictures? They devour the land. You can't stop them. You can't intercept them. They devour what's in their path. And just as nothing stood in the way of the locust swarm, nothing would stand in Nineveh's way. She was so cruel, she ruled all of those around her. That's what this nation thought. Nineveh trusted in numbers for her success and her security. Years ago, there was a story told of a British insane asylum and how it caught on fire. Well, when it was on fire, there was a man sitting in his bed just looking at the roof above his head burning. Not attempting to leave, not registering with him that he needed to leave and get out and escape. And so finally a fireman comes in and sees that he's there and he rescues him and takes him away. But the sad ignorance of this man on his bed represents the ignorance of Nineveh in trusting numbers. We've got plenty of people. We outnumber those that are against us. Who can come against us? And the reality is this, all who trust in the majority, listen, all who trust in the majority today are no different than the proud city of Nineveh. In Matthew 7, Jesus made an interesting statement in his sermon. It's not on the PowerPoint. Matthew 7, 13 and 14. He says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So you got to ask yourself the question, is it really safe to follow the majority? If the majority's going that way, do I say, well, I'm just going to follow the crowd? That was the mindset of Nineveh. They were so invested, so trusted in their numbers for security. Well, let's move on. Secondly, that was strike one. Secondly, Nineveh trusted in materialism for success. Look at verse 16, chapter 3, in verse 16. It says, you have increased the number of your merchants till they are more than the stars of the sky. But like locusts, they strip the land and then fly away. So Nineveh trusted in materialism. Her commercial endeavors were increased to an innumerable multitude. Stars of the sky. Ever count them? You say, well, no, you can't. No. On a clear, you can't count them. They're innumerable, aren't they? And he says, that's how your merchants are. Her wealth was multiplied. Nineveh was rich beyond imagination. The nation had reached their goal of wealth. Reached her goal of wealth. It wasn't about treating people the right way. It wasn't about living for God, and that's why they're in the position they're in. It was completely about wealth and themselves and doing what they wanted to do and having what they wanted. Like the locusts, Nineveh would strip and plunder her victims and then vanish. Her vast wealth could not shelter her from the consequences of sin. And here's where it's practical. Many hearts, even today, turn toward material goals and find only poison. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, in 1 Timothy 6, this is not on the PowerPoint either. 1 Timothy 6 and following says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that, right? And when we read that, we say, absolutely. Of course. But the thought of losing what we have more than food and clothing is a little disastrous. We don't want to think about that because we want all the other stuff too. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich, that's their goal, their desire. They want to get rich, fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. I love the text because it really outlines for us perfectly a huge misconception in our society, or in our spiritual society, if you will. As many will say, well, money, it's all about money, and money's trouble. Money's not the problem. It's our attitude toward money. And that was the problem with Nineveh. It was all about wealth. It was all about riches. It was all about having what they wanted to have. And here's the thing. If they had to go to their neighbors and wipe them out and take all their stuff to have more, they did it and did not think twice about it. I mean, these are the kind of people that we're talking about, because when we get to the end here in just another few verses, we're going to think, boy, that's kind of cruel. You got to remember the cruelty of the Ninevites. Cruel throughout this whole entire book. Many hearts even today turn toward material goals and they find poison, they find sin. Nineveh found disaster. Thinking about a guy I knew years ago, big businessman, very wealthy man, probably a millionaire. I never asked because you just don't ask those questions. But probably was, if truth be known. And what impressed me, I mean, he was good to other people, he helped other people, all that kind of stuff. But what impressed me most about him was his whole attitude was, well, God's blessed me with this career, and that's all good. But he just downplayed it. What's most important is my relationship with God and my family. And I so admired that. I mean, the guy could buy what he wanted, and sometimes he probably did. But he said it's stuff at the end of the day. And I was so impressed with God is first and my family is right below God. If Nineveh had been there, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. We wouldn't be reading from the book of Nahum, at least in this context today. Nineveh trusted in numbers for security. Nineveh trusted in materialism for success. We live in a very materialistic society. I mean, you think about it. Why do new cars come out every few months almost? Why? Because they're selling, that's why. Why? Because we want the newest and the best. Why? Because we're materialistic. And we want the best of everything. And if we can afford it, well, sometimes even if we can't, we still want it. I mean, we're groomed in our world, in our society, to be materialistic. Wear the best clothes, have the best stuff. And I'm not saying any of that is bad and wrong in and of itself, but it's the mindset and the attitude of trusting in materialism for success. Materialism doesn't make you a success. If it did, Nineveh would have been a great success story. I mean, they had it all. But yet they didn't have a relationship with God. So the numbers, the materialism. Thirdly, Nineveh trusted, verses 17 and 18, we'll look. Nineveh trusted ineffective leaders for guidance. If it's a company, if it's a ball team, if it's some type of business, if it's the church, good leaders are absolutely essential. I remember a church many years ago, and they were problematic. Had nothing in common with us here. We are not a problematic church. They were a problematic church. But do you know what the real problem was? It was in their eldership. And that was the issue. Many of the members had no idea. But it was very problematic because the leaders were problematic. Nineveh trusted in ineffective leaders. For a church to be successful and I say successful, maybe I shouldn't use that term, but productive, effective, maybe that's better, effective. For a church to be effective, she has to have strong leaders. Why was it so important that we go and install shepherds in different areas, different towns, different communities through the New Testament? Why? Because it's important for congregations to have strong leaders. Because what will happen when you get 600 and something people together? Problems will happen. Family issues happen. Bad things occur. And you need strong leaders that can address and handle that. And if you don't, guess what? Sometimes churches split. Are you following where I'm going this morning? Okay, well, but Nineveh trusted ineffective leaders. Leaders are essential. Look, read with me. Verses 17 and 18. Your guards are like locusts. Your officials like swarms of locusts that settle in the walls on a cold day. But when the sun appears, they fly away, and no one knows where. O king of Assyria, your shepherds slumber, your nobles lie down to rest. Your people are scattered on the mountains with no one to gather them. We talked about the sin of arrogance last Sunday, and arrogance controlled the leaders of Nineveh. A good example would be the arrogance of King Alphonsus of Castile. This is what he did. He studied astronomy, and having discovered what he supposed as an irregularity in the stars, he studied astronomy. This is interesting. And he finds what he thinks is an irregularity in the stars. He said this, listen, if I had been by when my Maker created the world, I could have given him some good advice. Are you serious? That's arrogance. It doesn't get any more arrogant than that. And such incredible arrogance marked the rulers of Nineveh. This led to the disaster. It led to the end of Nineveh. In comparison of the leaders with the locust swarm suggests that many were in exalted positions, which leads to being puffed up and leads to arrogance. But the leaders were in charge of guiding a nation, and their failure to do that led to a tragic collapse. And it's interesting to me. Let me look back here in Psalm 146. All of this could have been avoided for Nineveh if she had just practiced this mindset of the psalmist in Psalm 146, verses 3 and 4. It says, "Do not put your trust in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. When their spirit departs, they return to the ground. On that very day, their plans come to nothing." A man is a man. A king is still a man. And they had trusted in ineffective leaders. You know, something we got to have in our country, in our churches, in our families are strong, godly leaders. Folks, leadership is key. You think of any ministry we do, what makes it go? You say, well, the ones spearheading that thing, the leaders. And you got to have all the Indians and the people working hard underneath, but you got to have the chief that steps up and says, hey, this is how we're going to do this. And don't get mad because I use that as an illustration. I know I didn't mean that in a bad way. Surely you understand me and know that. You got to protect myself, but come on. Let's don't get carried away. Let's don't be like the world. Nineveh trusted in numbers for security. She trusted in materialism for success. Ineffective leaders for guidance. And finally, her disastrous final out. Verse 19. It says, "Nothing can heal your wound. Your injury is fatal. Everyone who hears the news about you claps his hands at your fall. For who has not felt your endless cruelty?" So we read this and we think, boy, that's rough. I mean, this city, this capital city is being devastated. These people are being completely wiped out. There will not be a remnant of Ninevites left. They're gone. And people are standing by applauding, going, yes, good, we're glad this is happening. This is wonderful. And we think, boy, this is cruel. This is terrible. But you got to remember, these are the people. These are the people that would go and wound and be cruel to those around them, to plunder and take whatever they could. No relief for Nineveh's wound. No one could or would do anything to aid this city. There was no success in her future efforts because her injury was absolutely fatal. Nineveh had no future. No future. All who heard the news of the dying city of Nineveh celebrated. These were the same people, again, that could care less about their neighbors, as they were mean and they were cruel and they would take advantage. Nineveh's reign would end, and none were willing to give help to this dying city, but were glad she was gone. 612 BC, the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, and the Medes. The city of Nineveh is destroyed. Why? She repented in Jonah 3, yeah, and was faithful for some time. And then some 150, 200 years later, she had fallen back into her old ways. And it was all about me. Arrogance, all about self, all about wealth. And if I have to step on people and hurt people and kill people and be cruel to people to plunder and take what is really theirs that I want, that's what we'll do. And that was how they lived. That was their mindset. And God had had enough. So many lessons. Let me share 4 with you, and we'll wrap up with this. Lessons from the book that I would say remember. Never take your eyes off God, no matter what. Say, well, you know, when it's easier to have your eyes on God when things are good. Okay? And some people have their eyes on God when things are bad, and sometimes they get angry. I'm saying whether it's good or bad, if it's good, you need to expect some bad. If it's bad, you need to expect some good. Okay? You're going to get a little bit of both in this life. We just don't escape without it. And when I say escape, I mean get through this life without the bad and the good. But never take your eyes off God, no matter what. The next lesson is this: don't trust in yourself or stuff. Because stuff, no matter how good it is, if it's the name brand and the best and from the best stores and all that kind of stuff, it's still, at the end of the day, guess what? It's just stuff. And stuff is always replaceable. It's just stuff. Don't trust in you. The next one is this: always remain humble and kind. You don't have to tell me there's a country song about it because I already know that. But listen, there's something to that. Be humble and be kind. You back up through the book of Nahum, and if Nineveh is humble, and if Nineveh is kind, Nineveh maintains her relationship with God. Humble and kind every day. And the last one is pretty simple: never forget God. And that's exactly what Nineveh had done. We're done. I know you're glad. And I am too. That's been a long study, but I enjoyed it. And I hope you see how practical many years ago that book was written to a whole other nation of people or city of people, but how it applies to you and me even today. This morning, if we can help you, if we can serve you, if you need to be baptized, have your sins washed away, or need the prayers of this congregation, if we can serve you in any way, we'll have a shepherd up front waiting for you if you'll come as together as we stand and sing.